Hello and welcome to the Hershey Area All Things Diversity event for September 23rd, 2020, Race Relations in Hershey. I'm Susan Court, Dairy Township Supervisor and proud member of Hershey Area All Things Diversity. Hershey Area All Things Diversity is a community organization led by members of Dairy Township School District, the Hershey Company, Hershey Entertainment and Resorts, Penn State Health, the Downtown Hershey Association, Hershey Story Museum on Chocolate, and Milton Hershey School. Joining me tonight is Amy Ziegler from the Hershey Story Museum, Kathy Sicker from Dairy Township School District, and Colleen Truitt from the Hershey Company. We are going to be helping to moderate your questions tonight. And for those of you who don't know, Hershey Area All Things Diversity is a free series of programs to create awareness and promote acceptance and inclusion in our community. We are very, very pleased tonight to have Dr. Samuel Richards, an award-winning teaching professor and sociologist at Penn State University, who instructs the largest race and cultural relations course in the United States. So, even though the title of this presentation is Race Relations in Hershey, this topic is incredibly relevant in all of our communities. Now, because you registered, you received a pre-session survey, and we thank those of you who had time to respond. You are all going to receive a post-session survey, and we appreciate your time in replying. These surveys help us make sure that the learning is meaningful and impactful. And for those of you who are maybe joining us for the first time tonight, we invite you to follow us on Facebook, like our page, so that will help you stay in touch with us. Tonight, following Dr. Richards' presentation, you're invited to ask questions. In fact, Dr. Richards would like you to ask questions throughout the presentation. So whenever something comes to you, please feel free to post those questions. If you are in the Zoom, you can post those questions directly in the chat. If you're watching the stream on YouTube, for tonight, we ask that you post those questions on our Facebook page through direct message. And then Kathy and Colleen will take those questions and put them in the Zoom chat for Dr. Richards to see. So again, if you're in the Zoom, post your questions in the chat. If you're watching the stream on YouTube, you may post your questions on the Hershey Area All Things Diversity Facebook page via direct message. Starting with our November session, we are going to move everything to YouTube so we can mainstream this experience for our participants. Our November session will be held on November 11th, which is Veterans Day, and our topic is going to be about understanding veterans in our community. You can watch our Facebook page and your email for details. And lastly, our session is being recorded tonight. So if you want to share it with your friends and family afterward, we certainly invite you to do so. Now I'll turn things over to Amy Ziegler, who's going to introduce our speaker. Amy, you're on mute. Oh, it's still on mute.
Rookie mistake.
No.
Starting again. Thank you, Susan. Dr. Sam Richards is an award-winning teacher and sociologist at Penn State University and the instructor of the largest race, gender, and cultural relations course in the United States. With over 760 students each semester and a 25-year legacy, that course was the subject of an Emmy award-winning television broadcast called You Can't Say That. The course is currently streamed live to the world every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. Sam's willingness to take risks and push new ideas is what led him to be named one of the 101 most dangerous professors in America. He obtained his PhD from Rutgers University with a focus on socioeconomic development of Africa and Latin America. His current work focuses on inequality stemming from racial and gender differences, and he works to develop programs that bridge cultural divides. And this is getting long, but I think this next section is wildly interesting, and I hope you can talk about it a little bit. As the Director of Development at the World in Conversation Center, Sam is currently co-director of a research project sponsored by NATO's Science for Peace and Security program to develop a virtual facilitated cross-cultural dialogue tool for NATO military personnel and civilians in conflict zones. The primary goal of the project is to offer people in conflict regions opportunities to humanize their enemies. His work has been reported on in the New York Times, MSNBC, the Christian Science Monitor, and PBS, as well as many other national and international media outlets. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight, Dr. Richards, and I'll turn things over to you.
Well, thank you, Amy, and thank you, Susan. I feel honored to be asked to address your community on these issues, on these very important issues that are seem to be more important with each passing day, or maybe they've always been, they're not, maybe a better way to say it is they're not more important, but we're taking notice in a way that we haven't taken notice in many, many years. And it's both heartening and disheartening to see that. And so it's very complex. What I'd like to do is start out and give you just a little bit of my background so that you can understand maybe a bit more where I'm coming from. And then I will kind of seed the conversation with a few ideas. But then honestly, I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait for questions to come in. And the best way, the most ideal way that we can work this is for you to, those of you who are listening, who are watching, to put questions out in the chat and that I can respond to. And in the ideal world, I would just be popcorning off of your questions to give kind of some quick responses and not go too deep into any one of them. And it just as a way to hit the broadest possible sort of series of issues that are coming up, because there are so many things that are pertinent today. And so the first thing about me, so I'm from Ohio, I'm from Toledo, Ohio. I grew up in the working class. I grew up kind of on the edge of several multicultural communities, multiracial communities. I had a lot of experiences when I was young that I didn't recognize as really kind of pivotal experiences for me, with friends, with acquaintances, regarding race, regarding culture, regarding people from other nationalities and lands. And I grew up, but for the most part, I grew up as a white guy, thinking about the world, seeing the world from a white lens. I didn't take school particularly seriously. You know, again, I was working class. My father died when I was 9. I didn't have a lot of guidance to direct me in one way or another. Pretty early on, I got into music. I wanted to be a rock and roll star. I got into lots of other things that could have gotten me into a lot of trouble, but they didn't. And here I am later today. About my 3rd year in college, I had kind of dropped out a couple of different times. I just one day had an epiphany. And the epiphany was that I really wanted to learn. I had transferred from a 4-year school to a community college. And in that moment, everything changed for me. And I said, I want to understand the world. I'm tired of not being able to understand what's going on. I'm tired of picking up a newspaper and not understanding. I'm tired of listening to the news and having people talk about peoples and lands and issues and not having a way to enter into the conversations. And I saw myself as being tired of being in debates and conversations and feeling like I really had nothing to contribute that wasn't something that I had heard somebody else say. And I said to myself, I really would like to have my own ideas. And so this was when I was 20 years old. And mind you, I transferred to the main campus. I was going to major in social work at the time. But then I took one sociology class and I was hooked. And what I was hooked by was the fact that for the first time in my life, I saw that I could think and that I was being taught to actually think for myself. And then it was a long uphill climb to really begin to understand the world. I didn't, pretty quickly, I started traveling. I was, I traveled to Europe. I studied abroad. I started traveling to Latin America. I focused on Latin America. I started focusing on other countries and other peoples. And I started teaching. And every time I would teach a class every semester. I taught my first class when I was 24. It was on cybernetics and human ecology. And I didn't have any idea what cybernetics was. I walked in the classroom and I said, I don't know what cybernetics is, and I'm here to teach you about it, but we'll figure it out ourselves. And that in some ways kind of marked my entire teaching career, that I had this sense that the classroom was a place for everybody to learn together. And so everything that I do when I'm giving a talk like this or speaking to any kind of audience, the idea is that we're going to learn together. And so I'll just kind of put some ideas out into the room, but we'll discover what it is, because I don't have the answers. These things are far too complex for me to begin to think that I know. I turned 60 3 weeks ago. I'm young, I'm old, but I'm young. I don't know enough. So in any case, when I started teaching, I would teach social problems, and every time I got to race, because it's like a smorgasbord of issues, right? You know, you do inequality, you do gerontology, you do families, you do whatever. But then you get to race. And when I would get to race, I would sort of skirt past it because I felt like I didn't know what to say. And I felt sheepish about it, even though I had, relative to most people, I actually had a lot of experiences and had been traveling a lot to Latin America. But I still didn't know what to say. And I felt like there were taboo topics, and I didn't know if I would step on a landmine and say the wrong thing, and then there would be an explosion, or I just didn't know how to manage the issues. And so I would just skirt past it. But then when I've been, you know, living in South America doing my research, and I came back up to Penn State and I started teaching that. They asked me to teach Social 119, which is this race and ethnic relations course. And I initially said, no, who wants to teach a race relations course? Like, you know, as a white guy teaching about race relations, and it's a big lecture class, and it wasn't that big. At the time, it was only 150 students. Now, you know, it's 800 or so, but I still was really nervous about it. And I said, no. And they said, well, you don't really have a choice because we don't have anything else for you to teach. So I started teaching about race. And then everything started opening up for me because I entered into the conversations. I walked into them as a student. So even though I was the professor, I walked into the conversations as a student, as someone who really needed to learn something, kind of like that cybernetics class that I taught early on. And I actually still, even by the end, I didn't know what cybernetics was, but I mean, I did in a very facile way. But ever since then, so this was 29 years ago that I started teaching this class. Every time I walk in with this idea that there's a lot for me to learn. And each semester I'm more and more comfortable, obviously. And I'm mostly I turned a corner in my comfort level when I brought my whiteness into the room in a different kind of way. I actually walked into I started walking into the classroom with the idea that, you know what, I have to see these issues as I am, as a man, as a white man, as a working class white man from Ohio who lives in the United States. I'm going to talk about these issues from this perspective. There's no, but after I had been teaching it for 20 years or so, I realized there's no answer to these questions. Nobody has the answers. You know, that everybody's looking to Black people and brown people for the answers to, you know, whatever it is that's out there, because certainly white people, I say everybody, because it really in some ways is everybody, but in particular white people, because, you know, we don't know where else to turn. So we say, well, you tell us how it is. And I started to say, wait a minute, I can't look to Black people and brown people. They don't have the answers either, right? They're you know, struggling through these things just like I am, just like everybody else is. They have their own lived experience. I have my own lived experiences. Other white people have their own lived experience. But we're in this together. And we will only get the answers to the conundrum of race and inequality, just like gender, just like all the issues, when we bring all of our perspectives onto the table. And it's like the blind scholars and the elephant, that we're all sort of holding a different part of this elephant. But if we don't understand what everybody is holding and what everybody is touching, we'll never really understand what the issues are that are taking place. And so, and how to really get into these issues and dig into them. The thing is, and one of the things I so often want to say to people who look like me, people from majority group, again, on race, it just happens to be whiteness, but you know, it's the majority. It's a majority group issue, and around the world it's different, right? So not everybody. It's really a majority group issue. That majorities are, how would I say? Majorities have a way. So hey, by the way, I'm going to say one final thing. Before I say this is my first thing that I'm really going to say. That's going to tip. You're going to say, okay, where's this guy coming from? And I'm going to say something that's going to sound like a political, ideological perspective. But I want to say the following. Sociologists are known to be really liberal, and sociologists are criticized for being really, really liberal. I'm criticized for not holding positions. that I'm all over the place. When I get to the end of a semester, a quarter of my students think I'm a really far right-wing conservative. A quarter of my students think I'm a far left-wing liberal. And then about 50% of the people are in the middle with this idea that they have no idea where I'm coming from and what I'm doing, okay? But here's what I want to say about majority people never really want to hear from minority people. So men don't really want to hear what women have to say. Straight people don't really want to hear what LGBT people have to say. People in countries with military power don't really want to hear the experiences of people in those countries near them with less power. We don't really want to hear. Because if we really heard, we would have to look in a mirror and see some things that are not always pretty, because that's the nature of being in a majority. When you're in a majority, you have certain kinds of privileges, certain kinds of protections that you don't necessarily see, but they exist. And it's really difficult to sit down and listen to some of the critique that needs to come toward us as people in the majority, right? So this is standard. This is true of all cultures everywhere, all peoples everywhere. It's nothing unique to white people or Americans or whatever the case is. But what it says to me is that the voices of people with less power are always squashed to some degree. They're always marginalized to some degree, always. This is basic sociological process. It doesn't mean that the majorities are bad. It doesn't mean that they're doing it on purpose, that they're somehow finagling or trying to, find some way to really hold other people in check. It's a sociological process. You get to the top at some level of a certain amount of privilege. Mind you, I haven't said white privilege, right? There are plenty of white people. This white privilege idea is like, yeah, there's something about white privilege, but you got to talk about poor white people and working class white people, and you got to talk about wealthy black and brown people, and somehow you got to juxtapose those things too. So when you throw around terms like white privilege, you got to deal with poor white people and wealthy black and brown people and throwing that term out. But there's something about being on top or having more power that allows us to, your people, the people who look like you, whatever that group is, the people who look like us are the ones making certain rules. And we're going to always make rules according to what we see around us. We're always going to make rules, and we're always going to establish processes according to the way we live and the way we operate. Whoever the we is, it doesn't matter what it is. If we turn things over, the group that's on the bottom is suddenly on the top, they're going to do the same thing. So, but what it means is that people on the top are just naturally conditioned by their perspective to to be busy living life. Like, I'm just living life here in my world. Like, I don't have a window into the lives of all these other people who are in a different position from me, who are saying like, hey, you might want to think about this, or you might want to think about that, because I'm busy living my life. And so what I'm seeing right now is a way in which, certainly white people, the Black Lives Matter movement, the one thing it's doing is he's putting these issues out into the community in a way that hasn't been done since the civil rights movement. And it's really, really, really big in that sense, right? So we're seeing, okay, so I'm gonna drop right there, and I'm gonna respond to a couple questions, right? So here, this is awesome. Questions come. So what am I holding, by the way? These are prayer beads, by the way. Whenever I'm talking, I have prayer beads. So sometimes these happen to be prayer beads that my friend brought to me from Iraq. But I have prayer beads from all sorts of cultures. Broad generalizations, right? Listen, the audiobook about Tiny is reading this book. I desperately want to hear whatever. Okay, listen. Okay, so hang on. Yes. So this is going to Robert. Okay, so look, I'm speaking in the most generalizable terms. I'm talking about like kind of living life. Not right now. It's how do I say this? human, it's not possible to take into account the lives of everybody around us. It's just, so Robert, I'm speaking directly, I'm going to rephrase what I said, okay? In some ways, I'm just like, I was throwing some things out there to get some responses, but here, I'm going to speak as a sociologist. It's not possible to take into account the lives of everybody. I pick up the newspaper, I'm reading the headlines about what's happening in Uganda, the floods in Bangladesh, the myriad issues in China and in Hong Kong and in Argentina and Brazil, the fires in Brazil and this group and that group, right? Nobody's different. We're all in the same boat. Black people in the United States, brown people in the United States are not taking into account all of the issues around the world. So there are plenty of Black people in the United States who are demanding that we look at inequality in the United States. But, Black people who also have cell phones, and in every single cell phone, there is slave labor in this cell phone, slave labor coming from China and slave labor coming from Africa in terms of the slave minerals that are in the cell phone. So people are maybe busy, where all of us are busy talking about race inequity and all of the issues that go along with that. But meanwhile, we're doing stuff on our cell phone that has slave labor in it. And how is that possible? Because we can't deal with every single issue all the time, right? So there's a certain way in which people in the majority, it's like once a system starts to grow in a certain way, once it starts to move in a certain way, it's just not, some groups are going to get left behind in some way. It's just not possible to bring every group on board, or else that would be, this is not a possible system. And so there's a sense right now, what we're seeing, which is really interesting, is that many white people are saying, look, I really do want to hear, I really want to know. I'm going to read this book and I'm going to read that book. And not all white people, but some white people. But there's a way in which, if we really understood the nature of the things that have happened and what are happening, just like all the slavery in our phones, if you really study the slavery in the phones, it would be almost impossible, and our computers, it could lead us to absolute breakdown. So it's impossible to account for all of the issues. And so at some level, we just start moving forward. And I think that's really what I'm talking about. Okay. So Stacy says, I'm interested to explore. Hey, keep your questions really short as well. I like this. Explore the concept of privilege further. My understanding is white privilege in the United States really has nothing to do with wealth, but instead things. Okay, so here. It's not that it has nothing. Privilege has to do with everything. It's economic privilege, it's political privilege, it's social privilege. I mean, privilege is privilege, right? It's the privilege of being right-handed as opposed to left-handed, right? I mean, we can just go on and on about the privilege. Privilege is one of those words that they throw around quite flippantly, very flippantly. So, one of my Black students who's clearly from the Black upper middle class, the other day was talking about white privilege. And then my job was to go to a poor white student and say, wait, hang on a second. Can you tell me what privilege this poor white student has that you don't have? So we're like, let's talk about that. And so then we start talking about the privilege and those privilege differences, right? So there's economic privilege, there's race privilege, there's the privilege that I have with my white skin that I've had my whole life, being a man that I've had my whole life, being able-bodied, I have my whole life. I don't see the privilege. I don't necessarily know it. I don't know when I go in and get a job. When I was 14 years old and I got my first job working at a fast food restaurant, I have no idea how much being white really mattered. I have no idea how much being a boy really mattered, but I'm sure it mattered, and it mattered all through my life in lots of different situations. But I don't necessarily see it, which is one of the reasons why white people will often say, or men will often say, I don't really get my privilege. I don't really see it. I don't understand it. Well, of course you don't see it. Of course you don't understand it, and that's the nature of it. So there is privilege in that way, but there is also privilege that in ways that's really complex and we really don't see very well, like American privilege. or privilege of being able to understand how to get by in a certain culture. The privilege of growing up in a family whose parents, whatever reason, sacrificed for you to get braces when you were young. So that when you were in situations and you were doing a job interview after college, you could go to a job, to an interview, and the person doing the interview saw that you had straight teeth and just immediately, without even knowing it, just knew that you were of a certain class, even if you weren't of a certain class. The same class that taught you not to wear black shoes and brown belt, that sort of stuff, right? So there are all sorts of privileges that we don't really, it's a conflagration of privileges. But when we start throwing privilege out there, like male privilege or something, what are we talking about? You know, what do we mean? All men have privilege? Like, how is that? All men have privilege over all women all the time? Like, how is that? Like, walk through that. And so one of the things that, well, man, there's so many questions. I'm going to get on the questions really fast. This is awesome, by the way. So one of the things is that's one of the reasons why a lot of people reject all this kind of conversation about privilege, is because people are too flippant in the way that they throw the words around to people who don't feel they have privilege, and either A, they really do, but they don't really get it, or B, they really don't have a lot of privilege in the way that people think they do. Okay, how do we broach the divide between majority and minority since life experiences are so different? Well, first off, life experiences really aren't that different in most ways, right? So there are some life experiences that are different, but my life, you know, so for example, when I travel to the Middle East, so, you know, I've had I wouldn't say it's not the privilege, it's made a decision that I would I don't have children, my wife and I don't have children. So we're able to travel a lot, and we travel for work. And when I'm sitting down with my Muslim friends in a Muslim country, and I'm at their home, or I'm at a restaurant, or we're socializing at a coffee shop, or we're working together, it's amazing how similar we are. I have a Muslim friend whose wife wears a full niqab, a full head covering, full face covering. All you see are her eyes. And I'm amazed at how much I have in common with him and with her. And when we sit down and have a conversation, I have to get used to the fact that, okay, hang on, I'm not, all I see are her eyes. And so okay, but after a while, I get used to that, and it's okay, right? And and he excuses himself because it's call to prayer, and he's going to go pray, okay. But I'm amazed by how much we have in common, how much we think alike, how much we feel alike, how much our life experiences, our joys, our sorrows, and that is true across the board with all groups. And the unfortunate thing is that every time that too often when we're having these kinds of conversations about inequity or race or whatever, it's always, we're focusing on the differences. It's always about differences, because when somebody stands up and says, well, but aren't we all the same in these kinds of ways? Then there's always that one voice that says, how dare you say that? And then everybody shuts up because it's like, oh my gosh. But the fact is, we are the same in most ways. We're the same in absolutely most ways. And if you don't, so the way that you begin to understand this, have intimate relations with some people who are of a race or ethnicity or culture that are not like you. And by intimate, I mean, warm relations, and go go to somebody's house and have a dinner with just two couples, and turn the lights down low and just talk about life and shared desires and understanding. You'll see that you have so much in common, so much. And so unfortunately, we're so often talking about differences. One of my jobs in my class is to bring people together. And I do this all the time to show how much we share. And the more we do that, of course, the more we build these bridges. But the more we build the bridges, the more we can talk about what it is that does divide us, because there is a lot that does divide us. I'm going to show you a couple of things. How'd you become one of the most dangerous professors in our country? because there was some guy who didn't like what I had to say, and on some things, and he and I duked it out one day on the radio, and he was writing a book about people who don't belong in college because they're too radical. And the irony is that he thought I was too radical left. But, you know, as a result of that book, I got called by I asked by an extreme conservative group to go give a speech at one of their conventions, right? So yeah, it's just irony. That's what I mean. I'm all over the place. Okay, well, are we feel guilty for the privilege we have, but don't feel guilty about that. See it as a very curious exploration. Like, for example, right-handed privilege. You know, when you take little things like that, and it's really fascinating, and then take it to the next level and start to understand it, and start to explore it in lots of different ways. And there's nothing to feel guilty about. Guilt is an absolute paralyzing feeling that does nothing for any of it. So sometimes it's nice to feel a little bit of rage and annoyance, but not guilt. Guilt is paralyzing. So it shuts us down. So no. And beyond that, you might have privilege in one situation, but that same privilege is going to work against you in another situation. So be aware of that. But anyway, what kind of diversity training should our first responders receive? I think the first responder, it would be really interesting. You know, the diversity training, have your first responders work with people of different backgrounds. That's the training. Make sure you hire enough people of different backgrounds, work side by side, experience life side by side, and see that we all bleed the same color. We all have the same kind of pain, and just learn all these subtle ways of responding to one another. That's the best possible training you could have. We can't tell people how to be and there are all these diversity trainings that go, and somebody like me that's foreign is like tells you how it is and how you should think. It's like, I don't have that sense. What we should do is start working side by side, and that's how we learn. You know, that's how we go. For example, my friend, you know, when I'm with my Muslim friends, it took me a little bit of time to really feel 100% comfortable. It's like, whoa, okay, the call to prayer. You know, I mean, I actually once accidentally converted to Islam, which is kind of a funny story. It's not worth telling here, but because I was in one of these situations where I just accidentally converted, but I didn't really. They told me I had to believe certain things about evolution. I had to reject evolution, and I said, well, I can't do that. So, okay, in order to understand others, you must first understand your own paradigm. Yeah, I think so, but also understand. So this is James Carter. That's a nice question. Yes, and understand where we come from and understand how we got to have the ideas we have, but also understand that we will never fully understand ourselves. Regardless of how many years of therapy we want to go through or whatever it is, however that happens, it becomes, but it really is good to understand ourselves. I will say the thing that helped me as a teacher more than anything was 2 years I spent in psychotherapy when I was a grad student and I was first starting to teach. I took the journey inward, and by taking that journey inward, I was able to then understand me and understand my place in the world in a way that I never could. As a white man, can you please take a moment and touch on your perspective? Yeah, so listen, Black Lives Matter. So it's really interesting. I wrote this down. So listen, y'all, here's the thing. I'm gonna just give me 5 minutes here, if I could, to offer something. Most Americans, nobody in the world really studies history except people on the very bottom. People on the bottom study history because they want to understand how they got on the bottom. So they really, they take a lot of time. They understand history because they need to look backwards to say, how the heck did we get here? So whatever it is, whatever country it is, but trust me, people focus on history. Haitians know Haitian history really, really well. But here in the United States, we don't study much about US history at all because, you know, how we get to be the most dominant country in the world. We also, you know, we're responsible for about half of all military spending in the world, and that's been true for the past 50 years. Do you think the fact that we are the dominant country of the world and we're responsible for half of all the world's military spending, you think those two things are kind of go together a little bit? And if they go together a little bit, then what if we take a look around and start seeing all the places where we've used our military to enrich ourselves. Do we really want to look there, or do we maybe not want to look at that? Because if we look at that, the next time someone holds the flag up and we're asked to sing the Star-Spangled Banner, we might feel a little bit differently about it. So like, therefore, I don't necessarily want to look at those things. So Americans aren't good at learning. People on top aren't good at looking at history. White people aren't really that interested in looking at history. People don't know Black history. So I'm going to give it to you in 2 minutes. After the Civil War, after 250 plus years of slavery, after the Civil War, slaves are free. What happened to slaves? What do you think happened to slaves? What happened to Black people? Do you think we just gave them land and said, after treating Black people as third-class citizens, largely because the mentality and the ideology was that Black people were not human, that at the end, just because Lincoln signs the proclamation, because Grant got Lee to sign a treatise at Appomattox, do you think that suddenly all the white people in the country just said, okay, Black people, all right, well, now we're going to welcome you in, and we're going to give you jobs, and we'll give you land, we'll make sure you have farms and you can work for yourself. None of that didn't happen. Conditions for, look, this is not a guilty white person speaking here. This is a white person who actually taught race inequality in an African-American studies department for 10 years, very carefully and thoughtfully, not because I had an agenda, not because I was guilty, not because I wanted to prove something, because I really wanted to understand. And what I will say is conditions, by and large, for Black Americans got worse after slavery than they were during slavery. And by worse, I mean, at least in slavery, there were laws against people treating slaves in certain ways. And slaves were, Black Americans, Black people who were slaves were they were worth a lot of money. The price of a slave in 1865 was like about $40,000. Today, by the way, I can buy a slave in Pakistan for $15. So $40,000 in today's dollars. This is like, there are actually some laws in certain areas protecting, right, people who were slaves. At the end of the Civil War, that's not saying that life for slaves was good at all. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is it got worse after slavery because Black people had no rights. And everybody was afraid of the slaves because what happens to slaves after their release, right? The ideology in the entire country was, like Jefferson said, if you hold, slavery is like holding a wolf by the ears. You can't let it go and you can't hold on forever. And so we have all these Black people, we brought them here from Africa and we've dehumanized them and treated them in these horrible ways. The moment we let them free, they're going to rebel against us. That was the ideology. Even though Black people, all they wanted to do, and this is true around the world, all people want to do is just be left alone. Just leave me alone. Just say, stop treating me like this. Let me just go live my life. That's true everywhere. So it's true today. Everywhere I've ever seen, it's true. But in any case, so situation got worse. And Black people had no rights. They had no jobs. They had no abilities. They were exploited to degrees that it's really unimaginable. And Black people never, ever, ever got on the ladder of upward mobility. We got to the 60s and we have to have the civil rights movement because white people are just even unwilling to have their kids go to school with Black kids, drink at the same drinking fountains. Here, I want to show you this. This will be, I think, pretty. So here is, oh man, hang on, here we go. You can see this, right? Here's family wealth in the United States. You all can see this, right? I'm quite sure you can. We good? This is family wealth in the United States. So median family wealth. So we add up we take every family in the United States, we add up all their assets, we subtract all their debt, and half of them are, of white people, half of them have more than, say 171,000, and half of them have left. This is white median family wealth. Look at Black median family wealth. At what point in time, look at Hispanic, look at Asian, which is high. Largely it's high because in the past 40 years, many, many more educated Asians have come in here, by the way. And by the way, Africans. So Black people, this is like, but if we separate Africans, the most highly educated Americans, people migrating to the United States, are Africans. And then look at Native Americans today, by the way, the most highly educated. But in any case, look at this. How did it get so different? How did it get so unequal? How is that possible, right? Like, how do you think we got to the place where white people just developed so much wealth compared to black people? And black people never got to the starting line. At the end of the Civil War, we could have said, hey, you know what we got to do? We just got to have an equal starting line and give everyone a chance. And we did. 100 years went by before the Civil Rights Movement happened, and we still weren't at the starting line. Meanwhile, white people are we're giving each other affirmative action left and right. After World War II, all of the benefits that returning veterans got, white veterans got, all the benefits, right? The zero interest housing loans and the money for college and the GI benefits. That 98%, 99% of all those benefits went to white people, and all the black veterans there were over 1 million black veterans who were eligible for all those benefits. But affirmative action, white people, we gave it to each other, black people didn't get. And that would have created a black middle, there is a large black middle class in the United States today, by the way. Black people aren't just poor, but it would have been equal to that of white people, and we didn't. And so we have this. So black people are just constantly catching up. Black Lives Matter is the idea to say, hey, listen, y'all, right? We need to have a reckoning of this stuff, this information, and where we're at. We need to have a reckoning, and we don't have a reckoning. And so this is what the movement is. And it's saying, look, of course, all lives matter, but for the first time, what we want to do is we want to have this conversation that says, yes, Black lives, can we just say all lives matter, but in all lives, we're not just talking about white people, we're also talking about black people specifically. We could talk about Native. Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but you're on a roll. But you did ask us to keep an eye on the questions, and I wanted to bring your attention to the one in the chat that is second from the bottom, because it's actually related to what you're talking about, and I was afraid you wouldn't get to it until you were already on some other topics. So if you could look at the question related to slavery. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I will. All right. So listen, this is going to slavery. Listen, the issue is, when we talk about, when those of us who study this talk about how how conditions for black Americans was worse at the end of slavery, in the years following slavery, it's impossible to really comprehend how bad conditions were. Everything that started, the most profound forms of social control, including the origins of policing, by the way, the KKK, origins of policing, one thing after another, started after the Civil War as a way to control black people, predominantly in the South, but also in the North. Okay, so there's no way that conditions under slavery were good for black people. There's no way in which conditions were acceptable for black people. But imagine somehow, as bad as slavery can be, that they can get worse. They get worse. That there not a single law in the land in the United States, for example, protecting black Americans who had no rights whatsoever post 1865. None. There was not a single law. But by contrast, in slavery, you actually had a couple laws that protected the lives of slaves, that made sure that, that a slave owner could get published, or somebody could get punished. Somebody could get punished by harming the slave of somebody else, right? But after the Civil War, none of that. There was nothing. And people, I say that because if I had a nickel for the number of times in which somebody said, but the slavery was over in 1865. What are black people complaining about? I would be rich, because people have never studied the conditions in the United States post-Civil War, post-slavery. And it's really, you can't understand today. You can't understand the inequality today without this, right? You can't understand how cities, So let's take North Philly. Do we know the story of how North Philly got to be North Philly? Like how is it that Black people and poor Black people ended up in North Philly? How is it that North Philly used to be a thriving kind of community of but suddenly it just goes downhill? What's the story? Well, the only story that white people can tell is that, well, Black people destroyed that. But nobody studies the story of how that happened and how the white owners and white politicians and white industrialists and white people went along with it, ensuring that we could take poor Black people, put them in an area, not allow them to develop on their own, and to not allow them to compete with other people on their own terms, and yet just let it all fall apart. And then white people get paid by US tax dollars, right? And the GI Bill get paid to leave the city out into the suburbs, affirmative action, white privilege, and meanwhile Black people are left in this area where they can't get a bank loan even to buy their own house. Meanwhile, white people are GIs are getting no interest bank loans. All they had to do was show up with their draft card and say like, hey, I have a relative who got a no interest bank loan to buy a house, never got deployed in World War II, my wife's grandfather, but he still got it because he got called up, 6 months before the end of the war, but he was still a GI and he got a no interest bank loan. Meanwhile, the Black soldiers who were fighting on the front lines in Germany got nothing when they came back. And that's what that is, right? And that's the kind of stuff that like, man, you gotta see that. And if we don't see that, that's what Black Lives Matter is saying, like, can we look at this stuff? Can we analyze this stuff? And that's what people are really asking to do for the first time. Not to mention the police. The police, that's a different story. Okay, how do we as a portion of the white majority begin to decrease our own sensitivity when we begin to feel our place is being criticized? Oh, Patty, thank you for that. I'm gonna get a drink of water while I prepare for that. It's hard to be critiqued. And there's some people that critique because they're like kind of self-hating or or whatever. They want to be like, they want to be part of a certain community or whatever. I don't know. It's just hard to be critiqued, right? It's hard to, look, just like it's hard, I can critique my own family pretty easily. Like I can call my siblings, like I can talk about my parents, I can talk about all sorts, but I don't want somebody else doing it. You can't talk about my family, but I can talk about my family all I want because it's one of those things, right? So when I can sit back and have a critique of white people, but when I hear somebody else doing it, I start to feel like I do when somebody's critiquing my family. But what it requires is to read some things. If you read about, just for example, if you read about post-Reconstruction United States, if you read about the 100 years between 1865 and 1965, you just really read. Well, here's a book for you. When Affirmative Action Was White. Beautiful book. That it'll lay out stuff and you'll just be, these people, and mind you, listen, white people, I'm not, trust me, I'm not self-hating at all, right? It's not that at all. It's just not. But you read this book and you think, these people were evil. Like, they were evil. This is just evil. That anybody could design a system like this and leave people behind in the way that they did. How is that possible? And you start reading some things like that, and then it just makes it a lot easier to hear some things when people are critiquing, right? To say, wow, not an individual story. You don't go with the story, right? Because you have a work friend and the work friend tells you about something that happened in a store that was racist. Your work friend, that maybe she's Mexican American, or she's Peruvian, or she's Chinese, or she's African American, or Jamaican, or American, or whatever it is. But that's one person. But read about systems, and you start to read about this stuff, and you just say, wow. And it just makes it a little bit easier to tolerate. And it makes it, it just makes it a little bit more, like, for example, I grew up working class. I had nothing. I had nothing. I started buying my own school clothes when I was 13 years old. I didn't have a dime to my name when I was 31 years old. I had nothing. I was a student my whole life. I had nothing. And look, I'm living amazingly well. But I study this stuff, and I know that that my whiteness, that in spite of the fact of my working classness, I know my whiteness has something to do with this. I don't know everything it has to do with it, but I know it has something to do with it. So anyway, okay, so just some examples of how individual people from different races can start to build those important relational bridges you mentioned. Yeah, so Dottie, I think it's really incumbent upon us. First off, okay, so let me just say, I'm going to speak to the women who are listening, right? Imagine that men suddenly, we just like catch on that, you know, of issues affecting women. And you know, just the kind of, just the things that women go through, the things that men say, the things that, the stupid, sexist, just dumb kind of comments and jokes that men make. Oh, I'm just joking, ladies. Like, what's the problem? You know, that kind of stuff. And you just think, what century were you born? Like, can we grow up here or something? Whatever, right? And imagine that men one day wake up and men say, you know what? You're right. It really is a problem. And then men start coming to women, just one after another. And they're like, hey, can you can you sit down and explain it to me? So tell me about sexism. And can you tell me, like, what is it exactly that you want? What are women thinking about this? And what are women thinking about that? And like, do I call you ladies or do you want to be called women? Because I called someone gal and she thought it was kind of funny. And then I called somebody else gal and she thought it was really stupid and I was an idiot. And like, I don't really know. And can you tell me, can you help me out? And imagine men are coming to you again and again and again with those kinds of things. You're going to say, stop, go figure it out on your own. So some of this is what happens in Black and brown communities. It's kind of like, you know, like women who wear hijabs, you know, like women who wear hijabs, if you 98% of the time, you can be standing in line with a woman at the grocery store and a woman's in a hijab, and you know, and you can say, hey, can you tell me about the hijab, your hijab? Can you just give me a little bit, like, it's really beautiful. And like, what, you know, what is, and 98% of the time, she's going to respond and be like, well, you know, it's this and it's that. Maybe she's having a bad day and she kind of gives you the cold shoulder a little bit. But once in a while, she's going to say, can you just stop? Like, don't ask me. Go read it on your own. Like, I'm tired. And maybe she just got asked by like 5 people, you know, and maybe she's just having a bad day. And she's like, stop, go figure it out on your own. You have this thing. It's called the Google, as George Bush said. You know, like, go look it up on the Google. You can watch all sorts of videos. Just go figure it out. Like, why are you asking me, right? So some of what's going on right now is that white people are saying, hey, I really do want to understand this stuff, but we don't know where to turn. And so we start looking to Black and brown people. And then Black and brown people are going to come out and they're supposed to tell us everything that we imagine or everything we want to know or everything we need to see, but they can't tell us everything. Most of what we need to know, we have to discover on our own. And we have to really know that every Black and brown person, like every woman, every person who's in the LGBT community, every disabled person has their own opinions. They have their own thoughts. So you can't ask one and assume that they can speak for everybody else, because they can't. And so it becomes incumbent then upon all of us to, including Black people and brown people, to just be constantly in this conversation and seeing where we can go and how we can do it. Okay. That's a real, okay. Oh, Lewis, I'm gonna try to get to you. Yours is long. Just keep Lewis's up there. I'm gonna try to get to his. What are the action steps we can take to build a more inclusive, accepting community? Listen, I got one. So down in Lancaster, so you have a huge Mexican population, and I'm sure I pronounced it wrong. It's not Lancaster, it's Lancaster or whatever. I think maybe I did it right.
Lancaster.
Lancaster, all right. So you have a really large Latino population, and you have a large population of people who are undocumented, right? Go to the, next time you go you want to go to a restaurant, go to the Mexican restaurant where only Mexicans go to, where they're not speaking English. You know, go have these kinds of experiences where we throw ourselves out of what is normal. If you have a child, send your child to the Cub Scout group or the Boy Scout group of all the kids from a different ethnicity. Send them there, have them join that group. So we step outside of the comfort zone of what is normal and what we think is what we're used to. Step outside those zones. That's the best possible thing that we can do to really begin to understand. Hang on, I'm not sure if that, I want to get back to that really fast. What action we take to build a more inclusive community? Yeah, so I think the best thing we can do to build communities is to find ways to bring people together in normal, everyday situations. Not the exceptional ones, not like where, you know, one Sunday out of the year, the African-American AME church and the Church of Christ, whatever, they bring their congregations together. How about not that? How about that there's a Bible study group that the two churches support and people meet every week at somebody else's house? I mean, not now we're in a pandemic, but, you know, how about that? Those are the kinds of ways to build community. Build it in ways that are actually force us outside of our comfort zone. And you learn to eat some really awesome food, by the way. So go to the African, so if you're white, go to the African America, the AME church, you'll get some awesome mac and cheese. You'll learn how to make it. Okay, can you present a chart that shows median wealth in 1964? Oh, no, I don't, but it's much lower and Black wealth is much lower. And by the way, in 1964, the percentage of Black Americans, in 1964, the percentage of Black Americans who lived below the poverty line was 56%. 56% of Black Americans lived below the poverty line in 1964. It's like, wow. But hey, by the way, let me show you another chart here real fast. Let me show you where all this stuff really matters. Where it really is about wealth. So you got to look at wealth here. You can't just look at race. You got to really look at wealth. So because the 1% in the United States is really, really wealthy. So if the territory of the United States were divided in the same way as its wealth, the top 1% would own this much of the United States. That's a lot. The next 9% would own this much. That means the richest 10% of Americans would own this much. Then you got the next 30% would own this, okay? Then you got 20% would own this little bottom part of Texas. And the poorest 40% of Americans would own this. And that includes 40%, that in that 40% are poor white people and Black people and brown people, including Native American people. We have a wealth inequality issue in this country. So when we start talking about white privilege and white wealth and white this and white that, it's like, hang on a second. We need to talk about those things. It's disproportionate, but we also gotta talk about this little dot right. First off, the bottom 60% only own this. And there are Black and brown people up here in this top 10%, y'all, right? They're just the vast majority of the wealth is being handled by white people. So, but we got to talk about that. Okay, it's not just veterans student, we have Black people moving forward. And Sam, why do we, yeah.
Sorry, before you go to that one, there's a question at the very bottom that's related to what you're talking about. Someone's curious what a percentage of Black Americans live below the poverty line today. She wanted to compare it to that 56% you just mentioned in 1964.
Yeah, so below the poverty, hey, Melinda, jump on your, the below the poverty line right now in the United States, I think is about 12% for Black Americans. But when somebody could jump on the Google and look that up. Yeah, which is, you know, pretty stunning, right? Okay, clarify. Can you, hang on, I'm gonna go to John. What do you say to Ben Shapiro types who say everything is a matter of personal choice in culture and music? I know they're, you know, so here's the thing. It's not that, you know, personal choice is always in play. Always, always, always in play. There's no question about it. But here's the way I look at it. When I look, let me show you how it's. I'm a sociologist, so I'm interested in personal choices, right? It does matter to me, because it does matter. like I didn't get to where I am because I didn't make personal choices. I absolutely made personal choices, and things happened to me along the way that were not about my choice, that I got all sorts of benefits that I never even realized and I didn't know about, et cetera, and all of that, right? But here, let me show you. Let me go back to something. I love this, but hey, I'm having a lot of fun. I mean, not fun, but maybe fun. Yeah, but I'm just getting started, by the way. But look at this. Look at this screen right here. So what you have to say, let's just focus on Native Americans. You have to say, there are individual, alcoholism is really high in the Native community, although we think we really understand how and why that is, right? But drug addiction is really high, violence is really high, sexual assault, very high in the Native American community. But let's just look at personal choices. Are we saying that Native Americans they prefer to be, or as a collective group, the individual Native Americans for sure are making a choice to be poor. They don't. So hang on. I'm going to come back here real fast. So there are no questions. I know Native peoples. I know lots of Native peoples who there are some that just don't want to work, and they just want to. They want to not work in the way that like build up, have a big house and have a big bank account. They're living in the world in a different way. They're living with the creator and not fighting against the creator to build up their portfolios. They're going with the great spirit, the Holy Spirit, in a way that's really amazing. And so money doesn't matter to them, right? And it's clearly a choice, but it's a choice that emerges out of their culture, right? There are some. But across the board, when we look at Native peoples as a group, are we saying that Native peoples as a group are making collectively choices to be that much poorer than white people? Are we saying they don't know how to make money? Are we saying Black people and Hispanic people, are we saying they don't know how? They're making choices across the board. So when you're born, you're just born into this idea of making choices that you just want to be poor. And that you just like, no, that's okay. So all these Black people and all these brown people are just really bad at making good choices to elevate themselves and get on the ladder of upward social mobility and do whatever they need to do to compete evenly with white people. Like, how is that? A better explanation is that we never brought people to the starting line equal to white people. And so therefore, like until even very recently, even now we're still battling it because everywhere we look for discrimination against women and against Black and brown people, everywhere we carefully look, I don't mean asking them, I mean carefully look, designing studies and really carefully understanding it, everywhere we look, we find discrimination. So even up till now, we haven't found a way to equal the starting line. That's a much more reasonable explanation for me, even though choice comes into play. I wouldn't be where I am without having made a lot of sacrifices and a lot of choices. So that's what I say to the Ben Shapiro types is like, can you read a book? Can you read like, Ben, how about reading one single book about any race inequality throughout history in the United States? How about just one single book? But with someone who very thoughtfully lays it out and talks about the institutional inequality existed. Read that first and then come back and talk. Okay, why do I think there's such a big divide between people who want to fight for racial equality and people who don't think there is a race issue in this country? Because most of us are busy just getting on with our lives. Like, for example, I really don't know anything about how to make chocolate or how to run a school system or how to work in a hospital or how all the things that Brian's the IT guy, like his job. There are all sorts of things that I'm so busy living my life. I don't know. Like I don't have time to look at this stuff. The vast majority of people, we just sort of end up turning a blind eye to most of life because we just don't have time to really dig into it. And we think it doesn't really impact us. And I think the divide is a lot of the different the Google, Leanna, that's nice. So the divide has a lot to do with the fact that all people can't study all issues all the time. And so some people just hear things that just sound so unreasonable. Black Lives Matter, police violence. Are police really that violent? Are police really doing these things to Black people and brown people more than they are to white people? My neighbor's a police officer. My brother-in-law's a police officer. My son's thinking about being a police officer. I just, they're not bad people. I don't get it. I don't really understand. But they don't take the time to really understand the workings inside of maybe a large police organization in New York City or Philly or maybe Atlanta, anywhere, right? To see what happens and how police are socialized. And of course, not all police are bad and not this and not that. Of course, that's not the case. But do you really want to look at this stuff? Do you really want to look and carefully, not as a way to condemn and critique and say they're all bad, but maybe as a way to understand the subtleties of what's going on, right? But most of us don't. And so we have a divide. And then on the other side, we have all these progressive activists, that whether they're race activists or feminist activists or class activists, they sort of half know the issues. And then they start talking about slogans, and they're throwing slogans all around, and they're misusing slogans, right? And then condemning X, Y, or Z person who's, really poor and lives in a double wide, who's disabled and that hasn't been able to hold a job in 10 years and is really poor and is going to the food pantry and one thing after another, and then pointing fingers at that person, white person, and talking about their white privilege because they just learned this brand new slogan. And so these activists on the other side turn people off because it's like I don't want to be like you, like that makes no sense. And so the left, i.e. progressive people, have probably about as much to do with helping to create the divide as people on the other side who are saying, I don't really want to look into those issues. I'm comfortable, I'm doing my thing. That's where we go. So, like, for example, cell phone, case in point. Study what happens with these cell phones. Study what's going on in China. Study what's going on in Africa. The Great War of Africa. Study about the Great Mineral War in Africa and the DRC. Take a look at that. How many of us have ever heard of the Great War of Africa? This is where 5 million people died, largely over the minerals to put in phones like this. 5 million people. How many have any idea of that? Right? And so here we are, and people dying today. Do you really want to know? Do you really want to know? Right? Hershey, right? The slavery that's in chocolate, right? Do we really want to know? Do we really want to look at that stuff? It's like, okay, I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe I'll just keep living my life. What are the end goals of diversity? From my perspective, the end goal is for human beings to really appreciate one another's differences and love the differences. And I want people to keep their differences because, damn it, I want to be able to go into an Ethiopian restaurant or a Jamaican restaurant or whatever the restaurant is. I want to go to the Chinese restaurant and I want the Chinese food that people are eating in Beijing. I don't want the Americanized version of Chinese. It's all hyped up on sugar and salt and so on. I want to have as many experiences. I want to go to Poland and I want to go to be in a Polish community and really appreciate this amazing food that the Poles make, right? Amazing cooks, by the way. I want that. I think that's probably the end goal of all diversity, is just to get along and give everyone a fair shake and treat everyone in a way that we probably want to be treated. Generational wealth. Listen, the generational wealth is key because, right now, in this day and age, the baby boomers are handing, it's estimated, what is it, like $500 billion or $1 trillion? I read it recently. I mean, it's just some number that I can't even wrap my thoughts around. Handing it down to the kids, and most of that money, most of that wealth is being held by white families. The disproportionate amount of wealth is being held by white families going down to white kids. And so these numbers that I put up there, meaning family wealth, it's just like it stays. It's the miracle of compound interest. You just, you have these bank accounts and they keep growing and growing and growing, right? So I always do this thing in class where I imagine my students kind of being on the ladder, and I put them on steps going up the stairs, right? So I put the, students who are poor kind of down at the bottom steps, and then the middle class up here, and they're wealthier people up here. And then I say, okay, poor people, start climbing the ladder of upward mobility, right? But the moment they start to climb, I have the middle class people and the upper class people climbing also. So it doesn't matter how fast they climb and how far they climb, these people are also climbing. So it's like, well, you're always, how do you get ahead? How do you get an even shake? How do you get ahead? Like, you don't. It's an endless battle. But not that you don't, but you have to account for the fact that the opportunities that the middle and upper middle class people, and so disproportionate opportunities that white people have. And again, not all white people, keep that in mind, right? Disproportionate, it's all relative, right? But the certain opportunities that are going to be handed down no matter what happens. So maybe we just have to intermarry. That's the thing. Actually, in my class, I always have the idea, I just need to stop teaching and just make it a big dating service. That people could just meet their future spouses from different groups and then have children. We could solve everything. But can you provide a reading and film list for your present when you're oh, Adrienne. Oh my gosh, I'm the worst person for that. Well, number one, you could watch my class. We stream it Tuesday, Thursday on Twitch TV. So if you go to soc119, soc119.org, you'll get the information there. So you can do that. And I have a reading list there for my students. But the one thing I honestly would choose this book, When Affirmative Action Was Fight. I think the guy's name is Kellerman or something. Awesome. That's a really cool place to start. Bridging the divide. Just reach out and just keep reaching. You have to work harder and be better, but still not get ahead. P.S. I'm Black and live in Hershey. You know, this is the thing, y'all, right? So Black people will say this a lot, what Adrienne just said. You have to work harder and be better and still run the risk of not getting ahead. And Black people say this, they'll say, I gotta work, you know, I teach my kids, I gotta work twice as hard, gotta be twice as good. And like, look, a lot of white people, they hear stuff like this and they just think it can fall on deaf ears and be like, oh, come on, that's just a slogan, stop, it's not really there. But honestly, if you read the research and the stuff that's really carefully done, I don't mean the pundits. I don't mean the people who are paid to say those extreme things. It's like the headline. The articles are never what the headline is about. So I don't mean that. I mean the careful stuff that is done. Man, that what Adrienne said right there about how you have to work harder and be better and still not get ahead. Or I see, Adrienne, I would just say it differently, and still not be guaranteed that you're going to get ahead. That's the key. And whereas, you know, if you're white, if you work really hard and you're really the best, if you don't get ahead, it's not because there's some system in place to hold you back. And now you might say, but there's all these programs for Black people and brown people and affirmative action. Listen, those are for a very small number of people. Very small number of people benefit from all of those, the kinds of affirmative action programs that we have. So we talk about it as though it's everybody. It is very tiny. One number I came across was 10% of all Black and brown people and women benefit in a very direct way from affirmative action. And most of the people that benefit are women, and most of the women are white, and most of the women are straight, and most of those women are married to men, which means that white men benefit from affirmative action at least as much as Black and brown people do. So there's that. And isn't that odd? See, this is the kind of thing, right? But again, I'm just trying to stay in the pocket here. Okay, do you think that we in the US need to make financial reparations? Yeah, listen, no, not to slaves. Yes, we do, actually. So this is far be it from me to think that we need financial reparations, but here's the deal. Let me show you this again, right? I keep going back to this, but I want to stay here. So look,
Sam, I'm just going to interrupt for 1 second. Could
yeah.
you just remember that none of the people watching can see the question. So if you could just read that question, I think the answer will make more sense for everyone.
Oh, right. Okay. Yep. Do you think that we in the U.S. need to make financial reparations to families of slaves so that the wealth divide changes? Yes, but not just to families. We need to truly invest in communities. So look at these different. Look at this. This is unconscionable. We can even this out a little bit. Look, if you understood. Study here. I mean, here we're near Lancaster, right? Study, and it's not difficult to find. You can find books on this. I don't have one off the top of my head, but it's not going to be difficult to find. Study how North Philly got to be North Philly. Just study that, and you don't have to study that hard. It's not that complex. You can find articles, right? And like how it is that Black Americans who moved into North Philly were just systematically shut out of every single attempt that they made to be self-reliant and pull themselves up. Be self-reliant. When I think about Black people, I think about nothing but self-reliance. So you think about Black schools, Black universities, Black churches, Black restaurants, Black community. That's all because white people didn't allow Black people in the communities. You couldn't go to our schools, so we're going to make our own schools. You can't go to our universities, so we're going to start our own universities, right? So it's one thing after, and then we turn around, we look at Black people who say, oh, you're separating yourselves. It's like, look, they're separating themselves because of a long history of being forced to be self-reliant. And when you look at North Philly, I'm going to keep with this example, and you study how it is that every single point, Black Americans were going to banks and being like, listen, I want to buy this building. We want to buy this house, right? And we pulled together our money and the bank said, sorry, we can't, we're not loaning you money. In fact, in something like 12 states in the United States, up until the early 1960s, it was illegal to even give loans to Black people. So it's like, it doesn't happen. And so like, so to go to that issue, if we do not find some way to bring about some equitable arrangement, right? And you don't just give what are you going to give each family $10,000? I mean, that's silly, right? But really invest in that way, in a true, thoughtful, caring way, then we're not going to make the change that we want. Okay, so hang on. I think I responded to Stacy a long time ago, right? So your question, Stacy, about the conditions that were so bad, clarify the conditions that were so bad because white people actively wanted to make it that way. The narrative that slavery is better is not even close to the lived experience that historical voices share. Listen, so once again, let me be really clear. It's not that slavery is better, because that says another thing. You got that? That's like, oh, slavery is better than what? No. That's something else. That's like asking Black people, like, well, look at how things are in Africa, but aren't you happy about slavery because that brought you here to the United States? I mean, that's like that kind of thing. That makes no sense. It's the conditions were so bad after slavery that you got to turn around. You got to understand, like, whoa, if they were that bad, like what was going on under slavery? Okay, so we can go there. I want to go to Lewis's thing. Hey, does anyone else have another question? I can go till 8:30. We can stop, but I can go to 8:30. I'm here if y'all want to keep going. I'm good to go. But I really want to try to, so Lewis says, if you're still on, Lewis, our backgrounds are similar. I too was not a great student initially. I too lost a parent at a young age, 5 years old, and I too am a professor at Penn State. I also want to learn more about race relations and racial and ethnic issues. And one of the things I did to learn more was to visit Auschwitz and Birkenau in 2018, pretty intense. Today's issues understandably surround the Black community, but I think that if people, especially young people, understand the discrimination against other groups, they will be in a better position to appreciate the discrimination against the Black community. I very much agree with that. And Hershey, for example, the Italians are the ethnic group that built this town. Yep. Yet they were not permitted to live on certain streets. Yep. And property deeds stated, do not sell to Italians. It's amazing, actually, right? Until Italians became white. But Italians were just a couple steps above Black Americans. Jews were not permitted to live in Hershey in the earlier part of the 20th century. Also, how important is it to focus on the history of local ethnic struggles in our public schools? I think it's actually really important. And I think it's really important. Look, for most young students, if you start talking about the history of Italians, unless they're Italian, it just sort of goes over their head, right? Like it's just like, because white people just suddenly all became white, and it's not the hot button issue out in the world, but I nonetheless think it's really important because it's a way to understand how is it that Italians got to be integrated or assimilated into the dominant culture. They did because they had white skin, all those Southern Italians. We do DNA testing. Southern Italians have a lot of African blood as well, which is why so many Southern Italians get really dark. But they were able to assimilate in a way that other groups were not able to assimilate. And that's really important. And by the way, talk about anti-Semitism in Jewish Americans. If you've seen this thing that just came out, to 10% of all, it's Gen Xers and Gen Zers, I guess. It's like people who are like, say, 18 to 39 years old. Today, they just did this big survey in the United States. So I think they interviewed about 1,000 people across the US between the ages of, again, like 18 and 39. 10% carry the idea that Jews were responsible for the Holocaust. 10%. And I think, oh my God. What have we become? How is that possible? So that is the longest, the hatred against Jews is the longest hatred. It's the longest hatred I think that the world has ever known, because it started in about the 3rd century in a more systematic way. So the 4th century, I mean. The longest hatred. I was in the jungles one time of Ecuador, and I traveled by canoe. I was way back in the jungles, and I got to this little community, and my name is Samuel, and so Samuel is a Jewish name, and everybody knows that. And these were indigenous peoples, but they had converted. Some of them had converted to Christianity because a priest had been coming by, and so on and so forth. And they asked what my name was, and I said it was Samuel. And they said, eres judío, are you Jewish? And I said, no. And the response was, gracias a Dios. Thank God. And I'm like, I'm in the middle of the Amazon jungle, and you all like hate Jews? Like, who doesn't hate Jews? Everybody hates Jews, it seems like. Everywhere I go, people don't like Jews. And then I think, wow, this is really disturbing. So that was a very eye-opening and disturbing moment for me. How do you make schools less segregated? By forcing them to be less segregated. You just do. Our schools are more segregated today than they were 40 years ago. You just have to make it happen. So charter schools, private schools, all these kinds of ways, like, one of the ways I would do it if I were king, I would say, oh, you want to open a charter school? Okay, well, it has to be diverse in some way. You got to have disabled kids in your school. You got to have black and brown and white kids in your school. You have to have whatever it is, right? But you got to have diversity. You want to have a charter school? You got to have diversity. You got to see it. It's because we can't continue to live these separate lives. We can't. That's how you do it. You got to force it. Unfortunately, I'm not into forcing. I'm not at all. I don't believe in forcing, but some things you just got to make happen. The laws and covenants that created North Philly and Levittown were secret. Yep. So we didn't even know we couldn't get them more. Exactly. Adrienne Hocker says, the laws and covenants that created North Philly and Levittown were secret. So we didn't even know that we couldn't get the mortgages, et cetera. Exactly. And then when those communities started to fall apart because the people were renting and the landlords let the buildings fall apart. The black people did not destroy the neighborhoods. White people have this story. The white people will drive through these neighborhoods and go, oh, when my grandparents used to live on this street, these were really nice houses. But look, now I see all these black and brown people and it all fell apart. Not because of them, because of the landlords. Because that's how it works. And so, I lived in these communities. I look at the landlords. I see this. And so it's the owners who do that. But the only story we have is the people who are there, and then they become so it must be those people, right? And so that's the issue. That's all secretive. And then oh my God, I just, you know, yeah, oh my God. Okay, book describing legal is The Color of Law. That's a book describing the legal aspect of segregation. This is Robert Holbrook says, The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. Yeah, that's actually a really good book. Doesn't the current political environment scare you? Where is our hope? Sandy Ballard says, my hope is in my deeds, right? That's it. That's about all I got, my friends. It does scare me, actually. It really does scare me. I am not because I'm pro-Trump or anti-Trump or pro-Biden or anti-Biden or anything like that. It just scares me. We are building a divide that's so deep that we may not be able to bridge it. There's a point at which, when you're fighting, like with your, so Hank, let me just say this. When you're fighting with your teenager or your husband or your wife or your parent or your friend, and you're fighting and you're right on the edge of saying that one thing that if you say it, you're going to be sleeping on the couch tonight, or if you say it, your teenager's not going to talk to you for 3 days, or whatever it is, and you just know that, and so you probably don't say it, but you really want to, and you think it really hard. Well, you know what? We're kind of there, except that we're saying it. And not only is our president saying it, but people who oppose the president are saying those things. And they're building this divide in a way that, we may not, and I'm going to speak as a sociologist right here, we may not be able to bridge that. It may get to the point. And we got a lot of guns. Or a lot of guns down where you all live, and I'm getting really nervous that people are going to start pulling those guns out like they have, and there are a lot of militias out there. And the scary thing is, by the way, these militias, they don't have any single ideology. You got these militias that are showing up to these protests with all their guns, who hate Trump, and others. In one pickup truck, all these guys show up and they hate Trump, and the next pickup truck, these guys show up with their AR-15s and so on. They love Trump, and everybody's one person is this and one person is that, and it's like everyone's just going to start shooting each other. And this is what's going on in Iraq, by the way. There's so many militias going on, and everybody's just battling each other. So couldn't some of the leveling, so Sandy says, couldn't some of the leveling wealth gap through our tax policy, but can we do it? Yes, we could level things through our tax policy. And by the way, the reason the rich 1%, that graph that I showed you about the richest 1%, that doesn't. Wait, you know what? I want to show you another. As long as you're here, I want to show you something else. I meant to show you earlier, but that didn't just happen. That hasn't always been the case. This happened in the early 1980s, where wealthy people realized, we could hijack politics, and we could actually start extracting more money, and we could build up this global empire and start sending stuff overseas more than we do, and we could make a lot of money by appropriating or using labor overseas. And then we just started to reform the entire economy, and that's what we've done. And it's very clear, deliberate desire on the part of people. So you just got to reform it in the other direction. There's no reason that we can't start taxing people. We used to tax people very high rates of taxes, and the idea is that we're taxing people because we're paying for the community good. There is this thing, it's called a community good. And so, but now we've moved in the other direction. So, we need to maybe move back a little bit. You'd never know it, but I'm actually a registered libertarian. I'll say that under my breath. Okay, just look at this really fast. This is white wealth, and this is white wealth here, and here's black wealth. So if we take all the black wealth, look at the richest 10% of Black Americans own 75% of all the black wealth. And the richest 10% of white Americans own 74% of all the white wealth. Now, mind you, the white wealth is much greater than the black wealth, but look at how black people are just as unequal as white people. So you got a lot of wealth up here, and in this part of the black community, a lot of wealth up here in this part of the white community, and it starts to level off here. So things aren't really that different. And so get rid of rich people. No, don't get rid of rich people. No, you don't. No, it's just that you temper it. You know, you can't look how rich. So, you know, one thing, here's a question I had, you know, like taxes, right? No, you temper it. Like, you know, I don't want to walk out my front door. I don't want to, you know, I live in State College, so it's a little bit different here, right? But do you really want to drive, do we really want to see all the, why is it that when people start talking about like taxes and why do we look down at people who aren't working and we don't look up at people who are just making so much money? How much money in taxes does Jeff Bezos, how much has Amazon paid in taxes in the past 10 years? Explore that question. How is that possible that Amazon could pay such a tiny amount of taxes? Why is it that people in the middle class and in the working class look at poor people as the source of the problem, but never look up at people at the top who are the ones making decisions, including tax policies? How is that? You know, Obama came into power. What did he do? He went to Wall Street. He took all the people that created the Wall Street destruction, right, in 2008, the meltdown, he put them all in charge of his economic policy. All those criminals and crooks, the ones who created the problem. They should have probably gone to jail, by the way. I say criminals and crooks. I shouldn't say that. Well, I should, because I've studied this, and in my estimation, they are, but whatever, right? But we put them in power. So anyway, why do we do that? We don't look up. Nobody looks up because we've been brainwashed. At some level, brainwashed. We've been systematically told that we want to be rich. We want to be like those. We want to worship those people. I want to worship Jeff Bezos. I want to worship Bill Gates. I want to worship all these people, right? So we're just worshiping. This is worshiping. And I don't want to be like those people down there. So therefore, I'm not going to look up in any critical eye at those people. And so this is how it works. This is how it works, right? By the way, I really am a registered libertarian. So we're like those really right wingers, the really, really conservative ones, but I'm a thoughtful libertarian. In conclusion for everyone tonight, what are your most important takeaways for us to help build a better understanding? Yeah, I hope I gave you something on that. That's Kathy. In conclusion for everyone tonight, what are your most important takeaways for us to help build better understanding? I think the most important takeaway is to read some things, study some things that we've never looked at and we've never studied. That's the most important thing. And B, rub elbows with people who don't think like us and who have different ideas than we do. But don't believe what they say. Because just because they have different ideas doesn't mean they're telling the truth or they know the answer. But share ideas and then interact with people who are different from we are in environments where we can just be normal and be ourselves. Just be ourselves. Just be average. Sit down, you have a hamburger or something. I don't know. Yeah. Hey, by the way, Fonati Abrokwa, gentrification is all, you want to know what gentrification is? It's then the money. So you got all these poor communities that rich people built, and then you take the money that people go outside the community, they get really rich, and then they take that money, they come back in and they buy up those poor communities that were destroyed by people with money. And now those people got to go find somewhere else to go. That's what gentrification is. And wow. Okay, so final question, Sandy Ballard, historical role of churches and the divide. Huge role. Churches gave ideological and theological justification for the inequality and for treating people poorly. Not all churches, because also the church has been instrumental in pushing forward equality and stopping slavery, et cetera. The anti-slavery movement started inside of Christian churches, by the way. Okay, Kathy says, thank you so much. We appreciate your time and thought-provoking information. I hope it was acceptable. I don't know. I hope I wasn't too.
We give you
I get worked up.
We give you an A+. Sam, thank you so much. My goodness, you were so passionate, so thought-provoking, and extraordinarily insightful. This was a great conversation. We thank you for not only presenting, but juggling all those questions all night long. How about it, Amy?
Yes, and thank you to everyone who is watching, because it's, as always, you always are all involved in asking great questions, and it's wonderful to be involved in a group effort and not just having someone talk at you. So it was wonderful.
I love the whole.
Go ahead.
Sorry, the whole concept. See, now you got me all excited. We've been quiet this whole night, but the whole concept of just stepping out of your comfort zone a little bit and reading something different, watching something different, being with different people, having different experiences. I think that's just great advice for all of us as we try to broaden our horizons a little bit and look to kind of move along on our own diversity and inclusion journeys that we're on. So I think that was super advice.
Well, it's not an easy journey. And it's not an easy journey in some ways, just because, you know, we just trip up a lot. And sometimes we trip up in places where we don't really trip up, but somebody trips us. And then we got to say, okay, well, hang on, was that me or was that them? And so that's a thing that happens. But, you know, it's a good journey.
We hope you come back and join us again. We really appreciate it.
Hey, listen, invite me back. I'm happy to do it.
We got the Hershey candy basket that was delivered.
Yep.
The company always provides that to our speakers, so enjoy that. You deserved it. And so thank you. Many thanks to everybody who joined us this evening. Special thanks to the Hershey Area All Things Diversity Committee, including Amy Ziegler, Kathy Sicker, and Colleen Truitt, who helped me this evening and moderating questions and just getting everything organized tonight. A very special thank you to Brian Blausch, who's the IT manager for Derry Township, who ran all things technical this evening. Brian, we could not do this without you. Just as a reminder, please go to our Facebook page, like our page, stay in touch with us. We'll be back on November 11th with a session about understanding veterans, and we hope that you'll join us for that. And we hope that you've learned something tonight and that you were inspired by Dr. Richards, and come back to us for more insightful programs in the months ahead.
Yes. And I will be checking out your class.
Yes.
Yeah, very good.
Thank
yeah,
you.
very good. Well, the questions were awesome. So to the community, thanks for your questions. And Susan and Amy, thank you. Yeah, awesome. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a great night, everyone.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Thanks for
All right,
joining
take care.
Bye.
All right, goodbye.